The sky over Seoul tore open with a sound the city had never known. It was not a natural sound. It was the deep, vibrating groan of space itself being pushed aside. From the jagged wound of light, ships descended. They were the color of old bruises and shaped like cruel moons, sharp on one edge. They blocked out the sun and cast the afternoon into a strange, cold twilight. On the ground, Lee Ji-hoo felt the sound in his teeth. He was 24, and until an hour ago, his biggest concern was whether his tank's engine would pass its maintenance check. Now, he sat frozen in the commander's hatch of that same tank, a relic from a past war, and stared upwards. His mouth was dry. The radio in his helmet screamed with overlapping voices, orders and panic, all mixed together. All units, confirm visual. What are those things? They're not ours. Oh God, they're over the National Assembly. A thin line of brilliant blue light connected the underside of one ship to a distant skyscraper. For a second, nothing happened. Then the top third of the building silently turned into white dust that collapsed in on itself. The sound of the collapse reached Ji-hoo a moment later, a deep, rolling thunder. He flinched, ducking down into the tank. Move. Now, scatter pattern delta. The voice of his platoon sergeant, Park Yuna, cut through the noise. It was hard and clear, like a slap. Ji-hoo looked to his left. Yuna was halfway out of her own tank, pointing with her whole arm, ignoring the debris starting to rain down. She was 10 years older than him, with a permanent frown line between her eyebrows that was now deep enough to cast a shadow. Ji-hoo shoved his fear down. He yelled to his driver, Min-soo, go, go, go. The tank lurched forward, its tracks screeching against the asphalt as it followed Yuna's vehicle into the cover of a nearby overpass. From his orbital command throne aboard the flagship's silent scythe, Commander Varlek watched the harvest begin. His 4 compound eyes reflected the dozens of tactical feeds. The planet below was a soft, blue-green prize. Its dominant species had barely reached their own moon. This was not a war. It was a collection. His mandibles clicked with satisfaction. The primary population centers are in panic, his tactical officer droned. Their militaries are responding with projectile weapons and chemical explosives. No energy shields detected. No coordinated orbital defense. Threat level remains minimal. Proceed with the demoralization broadcast, Varlek ordered. A signal was sent. In every language on the planet, a voice, cold and without emotion, spoke from every radio, television, and phone. People of Terra, your world is now a protectorate of the Ixani Star Imperium. Lay down your arms. Assemble in your major transport routes for processing. Resistance is illogical and will be erased. In Seoul, the voice boomed from the shattered remains of digital billboards. Ji-hoo heard it inside his tank. The word processing sent a cold spike through his gut. He saw people in the streets, frozen, looking at their phones in horror. Yuna's voice came over the platoon channel, ignoring the alien message completely. They want us bunched up and scared. We will not do that. Listen up. Their big ships can't hit what they can't see. We go underground. Use the subways, the maintenance tunnels. Their ground troops will come. We make them pay for every step. As she spoke, the first Ixani drop pods slammed into the city like meteors. They landed in parks and wide boulevards. The hatches blew open, and the shock troops emerged. They were tall, with chitinous black armor and weapons that glowed with a sickly green light. They moved in perfect, silent formations, firing precise bolts that vaporized concrete and metal. Ji-hoo's tank, along with 2 others, was lying in wait inside a collapsed mall parking garage. They had a clear line of sight to a major intersection where 6 Ixani soldiers were advancing. Aim for the center of mass, Yuna ordered, her tone calm, as if they were on a training exercise. Fire on my mark. The Ixani moved without crouching, without taking cover. They had never faced an enemy that fought back from hiding. Fire. 3 tank cannons roared at once. The old high-explosive shells were not clean energy. They were thunder and fire and jagged metal. 2 of the Ixani were thrown backwards, their armor cracked and smoking. The others scattered, their perfect formation broken. A sound like angry insect buzzing came from their helmets. They were confused. Reload. Back up now. Yuna shouted. Before the aliens could locate the source of the attack, the tanks were reversing deeper into the dark garage. Their engines echoing up on the silent scythe, Varlik received the report. Minor armor loss in Sector 7. Enemy used kinetic artillery from concealed position. Crush them, Varlik said, uninterested. Below, the response was swift. A smaller Ixani ship, a dart-shaped gunship, peeled off from the main group and fired a single pulse into the mall. The entire structure vanished in a globe of green fire. Jihu felt the heat wash over his tank even from 3 blocks away. He saw the fireball rise. His hands were shaking on the controls. They just erased it, his gunner, Young, whispered. They have the power to do that to the whole city, Jihu said, the hopelessness creeping in. Why don't they? Yuna's tank pulled up beside his in the shadow of a highway ramp. Her face was grim in the green light of her instruments. Because they want the city. They want the people. They're not here to destroy. They're here to take. That is their mistake. They think because they can destroy a building, they have already won. But the fight doesn't happen in the buildings. It happens in the spaces between. As night fell, the human resistance did not weaken. It changed. Soldiers in uniform mixed with police officers, with firefighters, with people who had just been office workers that morning. They used the city itself. A sewer main was rigged to explode when Ixani scouts passed over a manhole cover. Snipers on rooftops, using old-fashioned rifles, found that the aliens' eye clusters were vulnerable to high-velocity steel. And then, the lights began to flicker. Not from damage, but from intent. In a small, nondescript data center that had survived the initial bombardment, Kim Tae-shik watched lines of code scroll across his screen. He was a quiet man who liked puzzles. The alien network signal was a puzzle. It was advanced, but it was also arrogant. It had reached out, hooked into Earth's satellites and fiber optic cables, trying to download maps and population data. T-SHIK and others like him across the world had prepared for this. Not for aliens, but for any system trying to take their data. They fed the invading network, not with resistance, but with a gift. They opened every digital vault and threw the contents at the Ixani probes. The Silent Scythe's translation matrix, designed to interpret complex alien languages, was suddenly flooded with billions of simultaneous data packets. It received ancient computer viruses from the 20th century. It received every spam email ever sent. It received chaotic social media feeds, video files of bizarre human entertainment, and mountainous archives of contradictory historical texts. On the bridge, alarms chimed softly. The tactical officer tilted his head. Commander, we are receiving a massive, unsorted data dump from the planet. It is clogging several secondary systems. Varlik clicked his mandibles in irritation. Filter it. Attempting. The content is nonsensical. It includes instructions for combining flour and water, and violent political protests, and animal mating calls. It is noise. It is a delaying tactic, Varlik said, dismissing it. Primitive, crude, continue the ground advance. They will break when they see our strength is untouched. But below, in the darkness, the crude, noisy delay had given people like Park Yuna and Li Juhu another hour to organize. It had given a mechanic time to rig a construction crane to swing a heavy payload into a landing pod. It had given a doctor time to turn a pharmacy into a field hospital. As the long, terrible night wore on, the Ixani Imperial forces held the sky and the major roads. But the city, the dark, broken, endless city, did not belong to them. It belonged to the rustle of movement in an alley, to the single, sudden shot from a blown-out window, to the stubborn, illogical refusal of a species that had just been told to lie down and die. Commander Varlek watched the casualty reports tick upward. They were still minimal by Imperial standards, but they were not zero. And for a harvest of a pre-FTL world, 0 was the only acceptable number. A faint, unfamiliar sensation stirred in his ancient mind. It was not worry. Not yet. It was the first hint of annoyance. These humans were not behaving correctly. They were supposed to be broken. They were just becoming inconvenient. The first pale light of dawn did not bring peace to Seoul. It revealed the damage. Skyscrapers stood like broken teeth against a smoky sky. The air smelled of ozone, burnt plastic, and worse things. The great Ixani ships still hung in the sky, silent and unmoving, like mountains suspended by cruel magic. They owned everything above the 10th floor. But on the ground, the story was different. Li Ji-hu blinked tired eyes, looking at a map spread over the hood of a wrecked car. He was in what used to be a small public park. Now it was a forward staging point, hidden under camouflage nets, woven with burnt tree branches. His tank sat quiet, its engine cold to save fuel. They were waiting. Sergeant Park Yuna walked over, her boots crunching on broken glass. She had a smudge of dirt across her cheek. "They've pulled back to their main landing zones for the day," she said, her voice low. "They don't like the dark. Their sensors are worse in low light. The night is ours." Ji-hu nodded. He understood that now. The first day had been about shock and survival. Now it was about learning. The Ixani were powerful, but they were also predictable. They moved in straight lines. They always took the easiest route. They valued their equipment more than their position. A human soldier would dig into a ruin and hold it. An Ixani soldier would abandon a ruin if their energy rifle was damaged. "The problem is their armor," Yuna said, pointing at a rough drawing of an Ixani soldier. "Our tank shells can crack it if we hit them just right. A rocket from close range can do it. But bullets just bounce off. We need more punch. We need to make our own." Across the city, in the skeleton of an auto manufacturing plant, Choi Min-ho was thinking the same thing. Before the invasion, he was an engineer who built electric cars. Now, he stood in front of a piece of alien technology. It was an Ixani power cell, recovered from a wrecked spout walker. It was about the size of a suitcase, smooth and humming with a faint green light. His team had lost 2 people getting it here. One had been vaporized by the walker's last shot. The other had died later from the strange radiation. The cell gave off. Min-ho didn't care about the radiation right now. He cared about the energy inside. It was immense. He connected it, with heavy cables and a lot of hope, to a large industrial laser cutter. The machine was meant to slice through sheets of steel. He aimed it at a thick piece of tank armor they had scavenged, propped against a far wall. "Powering up," he muttered. He threw a switch. The laser cutter, designed to run on city power, screamed to life. A beam of concentrated red light, amplified 100 times by the alien energy, lanced out. It didn't just cut the armor. It vaporized a basketball-sized hole through it in less than a second. The metal glowed white-hot around the edges. The air filled with the smell of burnt metal. A cheer went up from the few workers around him. Min-ho didn't cheer. He looked at the humming power cell. It was now cracked, and the green light was flickering dangerously. It would probably explode soon. But it had worked. He turned to his assistant, a young woman whose name he had already forgotten. We need more of these cells. Tell the scavenger teams. Priority 1. And find me more lasers. Welding torches. Anything that focuses energy. The war was becoming a war of scraps. Humans were masters of scraps. In orbit, Commander Varlek reviewed the night's reports. The numbers were unsatisfactory. 27 combat units disabled. 3 light harvesters destroyed. All to localized, crude attacks. Explain this. His ground force commander, a veteran of a dozen harvests named Kale, shifted uncomfortably. The species is more resilient than projected. They do not engage in formal battle. They set traps. They attack from hidden positions and then melt away into the urban rubble. Their command structure appears to be fluid. We eliminate one node of resistance, and another forms elsewhere. They are animals in a maze, Varlek said, dismissing the concern. Increase scan intensity. Burn out any structure that shows life signs. They will learn to fear our sight. On the ground, the order translated to a new horror. The dart-shaped gunships began to sweep lower. They emitted a wide, pulsing wave of energy. Where it passed, it did not destroy buildings. It killed every living thing inside them. A building would look untouched, but everyone hiding within its walls would drop dead. Their brains silently scrambled. People saw it happen. The panic returned. The urge to run into the open streets was strong. That was what the Exani wanted. Dr. Kang Hai-jin saw it from her makeshift lab in a subway tunnel. She was a biologist, not a soldier. Her life's work had been studying extremophile bacteria, organisms that lived in boiling vents or acid pools. When the first energy pulse washed over the city, she had a different thought. She looked at the Exani soldiers in the footage, with their hard, chitinous armor. It looked like the exoskeleton of an insect. It was organic material, grown or engineered. She looked at her samples of Pseudomonas, a bacteria that could eat almost anything, given the right encouragement. She looked at vats of concentrated acid used for cleaning lab equipment. An idea, terrible and simple, formed in her mind. She went to find a military liaison. She found a tired-looking captain coordinating food distribution. "I need a way to deliver a liquid culture," she said, without greeting. "A spray, like from a fire truck or a crop duster." The captain stared at her. "What's in it?" "It eats complex polymers and minerals. I can modify it to be very hungry, and I can mix it with acid to help it get started." Understanding dawned on the captain's face. It was not a pleasant understanding. "You want to melt them. I want to degrade their armor, to make it brittle, to make it a liability. We can't break it from the outside with what we have. So we help something break it from the inside." The captain nodded slowly. "We have a few water cannon trucks used for riots. I'll get you one." Meanwhile, the digital war continued. Kim Tae-shik had moved his operation deeper underground into a hardened server bunker. The Exani network was no longer accepting random data. It had become a wall. But Tae-shik and others like him around the world had found a different use for their connection. They listened. The Exani were not silent. They communicated with each other on certain frequencies. Their language was a series of clicks and buzzes, but their computers translated it for them, just as they translated human languages. Tae-shik found that if he sent a powerful burst of noise on the exact frequency of an Exani ground unit's communicator, he could drown it out. He couldn't understand their orders, but he could make sure the soldiers on the street couldn't hear them either. He started mapping their communications. He saw patterns. A certain type of chatter always happened before a gunship sweep. A different signal preceded a troop advance. He began sending simple one-word warnings to surviving military units. Sweep or advance, it wasn't much. But it gave people a minute to hide, to run, to set a trap. Jang Seong used that minute. He was a former history teacher who now carried a rifle too big for him. He had found an old public address speaker system in a school that was half destroyed. When Tae-shik's warning of an advance came through on a handheld radio, Jang Seong waited. He saw the Ixani patrol turn onto his street, moving in their perfect, silent lockstep. He plugged his old music player into the school's system. He cranked the volume to maximum. Then he pressed play. The sound that erupted was not music. It was a distorted, screaming guitar riff from a century-old song called Through the Fire and Flames, played at deafening volume. It was chaotic, aggressive, and utterly human. The Ixani soldiers stopped. They jerked their heads around, weapons searching for the source of the horrible, unstructured noise. Then, Jang Seong switched the track. He played the sound of Ixani distress calls, which Tae-shik had managed to record and decrypt. The buzzing, panicked screams of their own kind echoed off the broken buildings. The patrol leader became visibly agitated. Its discipline broke. It fired its weapon wildly at the school building, blasting chunks of concrete. But Jang Seong was already gone, slipping out the back and into a sewer pipe. He had not killed a single enemy. He had made them waste energy. He had made them afraid of the noise in their own heads. Up in the silent scythe, Commander Varlet received the report of the incident. A minor patrol was delayed and expended energy ammunition. The tactical officer seemed almost embarrassed. The enemy used acoustic disturbances and playback of our own casualty signals. Varlik was silent for a long time. This was not combat. This was mockery. It was the behavior of a pest, not a worthy foe. But pests could still ruin a harvest. Enough, he said, his voice cold. The next major concentration of life signs you detect, you will not sweep it. You will level it. Completely. Use the orbital lances. Show them the cost of their insolence. He wanted to break their spirit. He did not understand that humans, when pushed into a corner, have no spirit left to break. They only have spite. And spite is a foundation upon which terrifying things can be built. The silence was the worst part. For 3 days, the Ixani gunships had not swept the streets. The great obsidian ships hung in the sky, quiet. The ground troops had pulled back to their fortified landing zones, which glowed with eerie green force fields. It felt like the eye of a storm. In the broken heart of Seoul, people waited, and the waiting tightened their nerves like guitar strings. Lee Ji-hoo used the quiet to move. His tank was low on shells, so they left it hidden. He, Sergeant Park Yuna, and a few others became scouts. They moved through the underground, through subway tunnels and flooded maintenance shafts, mapping the Ixani positions from below. They saw the landing zones were not just for soldiers. They were processing centers. Humans who had given themselves up were led into large, shimmering structures. They did not come out. They're sorting them, Yuna said, her voice a hollow whisper in the dark tunnel. Her face was lit by the green glow from a grate above. Like machinery, taking the useful ones. The rest. She didn't finish. She didn't need to Da Chia, who felt a cold anger settle in his stomach. It was a different feeling from the first day's panic. This was clearer. This was hatred. He watched a group of Ixani engineers working on a large piece of equipment. They moved with efficient, silent purpose. They didn't look at the humans in the cages nearby. They were just inventory. We need to know more, Yuna said. We need to know what they're thinking. What their goal is, exactly. not just harvest. What does that mean? As if answering her thought, the trap was sprung. It happened in the old financial district. A strong human resistance signal was detected, a coordinated radio broadcast calling for survivors to rally. It was a fake. The Exani had created it. When several hundred humans, desperate for hope and organization, gathered in the open plaza of the ruined stock exchange, the Exani acted. There was no warning from the gunships. Instead, a single beam of pure white light stabbed down from the largest ship in orbit. It was thin, like a needle. It touched the center of the plaza. There was no explosion. The ground, the buildings, the people, everything within 200 meters simply turned into glass and fine ash. A perfect smooth circle of nothingness was carved into the city. The surrounding buildings were untouched. It was a demonstration of surgical, absolute power. From orbit, Commander Varlek watched the thermal signatures vanish. A necessary lesson. They will now understand the futility of gathering. On the ground, the lesson was learned, but not the one he intended. The survivors saw the glassed crater. They didn't see futility. They saw an enemy that would kill from the sky without ever looking them in the eye. The anger deepened, turning hard and sharp. In the aftermath, the Exani grew bold. Believing the humans were finally broken, they launched aggressive patrols to round up survivors. During one of these, a patrol was lured into a narrow street by the sound of a crying child. It was a recording. When the 6 Exani soldiers were fully inside the street, both ends were blocked by collapsed rubble, triggered remotely. The soldiers were not concerned. Their weapons could clear the rubble in minutes. They never got the chance. From the windows above, people poured down not bullets, but thick, sticky liquid. It was Dr. Kong Haijin's mixture, the hungry bacteria in a soupy, acidic carrier. It splashed over their shining armor. At first, the Exani ignored it. It was just liquid. Then the acid bit in. A hissing sound rose. The hard, chitinous plates began to fog and bubble. The soldiers clicked in alarm, trying to scrape it off. But the mixture was designed to cling. Within minutes, the armor at the joints grew brittle. One soldier moved its arm, and the shoulder plate cracked like an eggshell. The flesh underneath was exposed, pink and vulnerable. A single shot from a high-powered rifle from a rooftop found it. The soldier fell. The others panicked. They fired their energy weapons wildly, melting concrete and steel, but the humans were hidden. They were patient. They waited for the mixture to work. One by one, the mighty Exani warriors were reduced to stumbling, their armor failing, and then they were ended with precise economic violence. It was not a battle of strength. It was a dissection. One soldier, however, did not die. Its leg armor was compromised, and it fell, its weapon skittering away. Before it could trigger a self-destruct or call for help, a net of heavy wires fell on it from above. Humans swarmed it, not to kill, but to bind. They shoved a metal gag in its mandibles and wrapped its limbs in thick insulation tape. They dragged it, struggling furiously, into a dark hole in the ground. The prize was taken to a deep, secure bunker that had once been a bank vault. The air was cold and smelled of dust and fear. The Exani prisoner was secured to a heavy chair. It stared with its 4 black eyes, buzzing in hatred. Sergeant Park Yuna stood before it. She was not there to torture it. She was there to talk. "We need to understand you," she said calmly, as Kim Tae-shik's best translation software tried to keep up, emitting clicks and buzzes from a speaker. "You have the power to leave. Why do you stay? Why do you take us?" The Exani buzzed something back. The translation came through, flat and electronic. "You are resources. You are part of the harvest. Your planet is useful. Your species can be useful. Or it can be waste. Useful for what? For the Imperium. For growth. For order. Yuna leaned forward. You will never harvest us. We will fight until not one of us is left. We will burn everything you want. We will poison the water and scorch the earth. You will get nothing but ash and blood. Do you understand that? The Ixani made a sound that the translator interpreted as disdainful laughter. You are one small world. You have no concept of the Imperium scale. Your resistance is a flicker. It will be forgotten. Yuna smiled then, a thin, cold smile. Let me show you what a flicker can do. She nodded to a technician. A screen flickered on. It showed edited footage from the past week. Not of Ixani victories, but of human actions. The melted patrol. The sniped officers. The clogged Ixani communications with screaming music. The stolen power cells turning their own energy against them. It showed a map of the city, with Ixani-controlled zones shrinking, not growing. As they were forced to consolidate, the prisoners' buzzing grew agitated. This is inefficient. Wasteful of your own lives. That is what you do not understand, Yuna said, her voice dropping. We do not count lives the way you do. We count cost. And the cost of letting you take us is infinite. So any price we pay is worth it. We have a history of this. We have a word for it. Total war. It means there is no line we will not cross. The soldier and the farmer. The factory and the hospital. It all becomes part of the war. You are not fighting an army. You are fighting an idea. And ideas do not surrender. She let that hang in the cold air. Then she did something unexpected. She ordered the prisoner's bonds loosened just a little. She placed a bottle of water and a simple food bar within its reach. You are not a resource to us. You are a person we have captured. We will feed you. We will keep you from harm. Because that is our idea too. The Ixani stared at her, its compound eyes unreadable. The arrogance was still there, but it was now mixed with a profound confusion. This was not in any imperial manual for dealing with pre-FTL species. They were supposed to be cowed or enraged. Not this cold, logical, and terrifyingly patient. The prisoner's value was immense. Through its armor systems, still faintly emitting signals, Kin Tae-shik began to trace the Ixani network deeper. He found access points. He found frequencies for command and control. The prisoner was an unintentional key. 2 days later, a major Ixani supply convoy was moving from the main landing zone to a forward position. It was heavily guarded. Its route was a secret, but the prisoner's armor had beaconed its location to the convoy as a standard friendly signal. Tae-shik found the signal, and he gave the route to Yuna. The convoy was annihilated, not by tanks, but by 100 small, vicious ambushes along its length. Buried mines made from fertilizer and fuel. Snipers targeting drivers. And at the climax, a stolen water truck modified by Dr. Kong's team sprayed the entire convoy with their acidic mixture. The Ixani vehicles, their armor degrading, became tombs for their occupants. On the silent scythe, Commander Varlek received the report. A full supply convoy, lost. His mandibles clenched tight. How? The tactical officer was trembling. They knew the route. They knew the weaknesses of the new armor plating. It is as if they had a guide. Varlek's thoughts went to the missing soldier, the one whose signal had gone silent, then reappeared briefly near the convoy route before vanishing again. A cold suspicion formed. The human woman's words, intercepted from the prisoner's cell, echoed in his mind. You are not fighting an army. You are fighting an idea. For the first time, Varlek felt a tremor that was not anger. It was the first faint chill of fear. These humans were not just resisting. They were learning, adapting, and turning his own strength against him. And they were doing it with a calm, terrible smile. The stolen Ixani soldier was gone. Its cell in the deep bunker was empty, the heavy bonds cut not by force, but by something hot and precise. A faint smell of ozone hung in the air. On the floor was a small, burned-out device, a personal recall beacon, hidden within its own body. Sergeant Park Yuna stared at the empty chair, her face a mask of cold fury. They had learned from their prisoner, but their prisoner had also learned from them. And it had escaped. Worse news came from the scouts. The Ixani were changing tactics. No more patrols. No more attempts to take prisoners. The great ships in the sky were shifting position, aligning themselves over every major remaining human holdout. The silent threat was clear: surrender or be obliterated from orbit. The time for harvesting seemed to be over. Now it was time for cleaning dot in a makeshift command center under the ruins of a museum. The remaining human leaders gathered. Li Ji-hu was there, his uniform stained and torn. Choi Min-ho, the engineer, had diagrams of Ixani power systems scattered on a table. Kim Tae-shik looked pale, his eyes red from staring at screens. Dr. Kang Hai-jin stood quietly, her arms crossed. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and despair. "They're going to glass the city," a militia captain said, his voice hollow. "They're done with us." Yuna shook her head. "No, if they were done, they would have done it. This is a threat. They want us to break and run into the open, or to give up the ones they think are valuable. They still want something. What do we have left?" Ji-hu asked, the question hanging in the air. Kim Tae-shik looked up. "We have their network. The prisoners' escape." It caused a data surge. For a second, when the recall beam activated, a lot of their security protocols reset. "I have a way in." "Not for long. Maybe minutes." "To do what?" Min-ho asked. "Shut down a ship? We don't have that kind of power." Tae-shik was silent for a moment. "No, but we can give them a message. Not a broadcast. Not noise. We can upload data directly into their core systems, into the brain of their fleet." "What data?" Yuna asked. "Ours," Tae-shik said simply. "Everything. Not the spam. The truth. The history of what we are." The plan was insane. It was a last, desperate shout into the void. They gathered data packs. Not military secrets, but human ones. Archives from libraries that had been bombed. Footage from their own history. The trenches of old wars. The ruins of cities after bombings. The grim, determined faces of soldiers and civilians in times of total war. They included texts on philosophy of sacrifice, on spite, on the terrible will to survive that defined their species. They compiled records of every resistance movement in their history, of every time a smaller. Weaker force had made a larger one bleed, until it left dot, it was a psychological weapon, aimed at an alien mind they could not understand. While Tae-shik prepared the data assault, a different plan was forming on the ground. The Ixani had consolidated their forces around a single massive landing zone in the old international airport. It was protected by energy shields and ringed with gun emplacements. It was where the escapee had been beamed back to. It was the heart of the infection. "We can't beat that shield," Min-ho said, looking at thermal scans. "But we might not need to beat it. We just need to make it unstable for a few seconds. A massive, chaotic energy surge on the ground might cause a feedback loop. It could force their systems to divert power, maybe even cause a local shield failure. How do we create a surge big enough?" Ji-hu asked. Min-ho smiled, a tired, grim smile. He pointed to a map. The old maglev maintenance depot. It's a graveyard of superconducting magnets and capacitor banks. and we have 17 unstable Exani power cells left from the scavenger teams. If we wire it all together, can trigger it at once, it will be like a lightning strike on their doorstep. It was a suicide mission. Everyone knew it. The depot was in no man's land, visible from the Exani towers. Getting the cells there would be almost impossible. Keeping the Exani from detecting the power buildup would be even harder. Yuna made the decision. We do both. Taeshik uploads the history. We hit the power depot. Chaos in their systems, chaos on their doorstep. Maybe, just maybe, it makes them blink. The next hours were a frantic, silent scramble. Small teams, moving like ghosts through the rubble, began the slow work of transporting the volatile power cells across the city. Each cell was a potential bomb, glowing with a sickly green light. One misstep, one stray shot, and the team would vanish. Chi-Hu led one of these teams. The weight of the cell in his arms was terrible. It hummed, and the vibration made his bones ache. He could feel the radiation prickling his skin, even through his jacket. He thought of the glassed plaza, of the people turned to ash. He kept walking God above, on the silent scythe. Commander Varlek was impatient. The recall of the prisoner had been successful. The creature's mind was being scanned, its memories of the human resistance downloaded and analyzed. The data was troubling. The cold logic of the human female sergeant. The adaptability. The sheer, wasteful commitment to defiance. It did not compute. A priority signal flashed from the Imperial Council on Exan Prime. The message was terse. The harvest of Planet 3 was taking too long. Resources were needed elsewhere. He was to conclude operations, one way or another, within the next planetary rotation. Varlek made his decision. He would scorch the major resistance nodes from orbit. A demonstration of such power would shatter the remaining will. He gave the order. The orbital lances began to power up. Targeting solutions were locked. On the ground, Kim Tae-shik saw the power spike in the orbital weapons. He had minutes, maybe seconds. His fingers flew over the keyboard. He bypassed the last firewall, a jagged, beautiful piece of code written in a moment of pure desperation. He reached the core system of the Exani Fleet AI Avast, cold intelligence designed for logistics, threat assessment, and harvest efficiency. He did not attack it. He opened a connection and began to upload. He poured the entire, ugly, glorious history of human conflict into the AI's processing core. At the same moment, at the Maglev depot, Choi Min-ho gave the signal. The last power cell was wired into the chaotic nest of capacitors and magnets. The team ran. They had 30 seconds. Min-ho did not run. He stayed at the trigger. He looked at the monstrous Exani base, its shield shimmering like a green dome. He thought of the cars he used to build, of a world that made sense. He pressed the button. The world turned white. No sound came at first. Then a roar, deeper than thunder, rolled across the city. A column of raw energy, green and blue and violet white, erupted from the depot and lashed out like a whip at the Exani shield. The shield flared, a brilliant, painful emerald. It held for a second, 2 seconds. Then, where the energy beam struck, it flickered. A patch the size of a house went dark, revealing the stark metal of the structures beneath. It was the opportunity the humans had. From hidden positions, every remaining rocket, every artillery piece, every weapon they could reach, fired at that single fragile spot. The night lit up with tracers and explosions. On the flagship, alarms screamed. The shield failure was a minor event, militarily, but it coincided with the AI core being flooded with impossible data. The AI, tasked with calculating resource expenditure and threat levels, was suddenly processing the siege of Stalingrad, the Battle of Verdun. The burnt earth policies of ancient armies. The videos of human soldiers throwing themselves on grenades to save comrades. The graphs of industrial output during total war, where piano factories made grenade parts and perfume distilleries made fuel. The AI analyzed human history and saw a single, repeating equation when threatened with annihilation. Human resource expenditure approached infinity. Their capacity for sacrifice became an unquantifiable variable. The projected cost of subduing this species no longer added up. It escalated towards a number that meant the utter consumption of the Exani task force. And then More. Commander Varlik shouted orders to return fire, to launch fighters, to crush the attack. But the response was sluggish. The AI, logically following its core directive of preserving imperial assets, was recalculating. It saw the minor shield breach. It saw the continued, illogical attacks despite overwhelming force. It cross-referenced this with the uploaded data on human total war. A new directive emerged from the AI, cold and absolute. Containment breach. Vermilion-level hazard protocol. Across the Exani fleet, systems seized. Weapons power cycled down. Engine thrusters fired not for attack, but for retreat. The beautiful, terrible ships began to turn away from the planet. Varlik stared at his screens in disbelief. What is this? Who gave the order? The tactical officer's voice was a whisper of terror. The Core Intelligence Commander. It has assessed the threat. It has quarantined the entire system. We are ordered to withdraw. Immediately and completely. Below, Li Ji-hu, lying in rubble half-deaf from the explosion, saw the ships turn. He saw the green glow of their engines brighten, not facing the earth, but facing the stars. He did not understand. He thought it was a trick. But then, one by one, with silent, terrifying speed, the great obsidian crescents shot upwards, piercing the clouds and vanishing into the blackness of space. Within minutes, the sky was empty. Only smoke and the cold stars remained. The silence returned. But this time, it was different. It was the silence of an open cage. The hunters were gone. The sky stayed empty. The first day, no one believed it. People hid in their holes, waiting for the hammer to fall. They waited for the green beams of light. They waited for the cruel ships to return. But only the normal sounds came back: the wind through broken windows, the distant crackle of fires, the call of a bird that had somehow survived. On the second day, Li Ji-hu climbed to the top of a shattered parking garage. He carried a pair of old binoculars. He scanned the sky until his neck ached. He saw clouds and the moon faint in the daytime sky and the endless blue. He saw no ships. He sat down on the dusty concrete, feeling the weak sun on his face, and he cried without making a sound. Slowly, like animals emerging after a flood, people came out. They stood in the streets, looking up, shielding their eyes. They did not cheer. There was no energy for cheering. They just stood, feeling the strange, light feeling of a weight that was no longer there. The work began. It was not the work of rebuilding, not yet. It was the work of counting, of finding the living, of tending to the wounded who had been hidden away, of quietly burying the dead. Dr. Kong Hai-jin put away her bacteria cultures and acid mixtures. She went back to being a doctor, setting up a clinic in a tent, her hands now cleaning wounds and setting bones instead of brewing weapons. Choi Minho walked through the ruins of his auto plant. He kicked a piece of twisted metal that had once been a laser cutter. He looked at the scorch marks on the wall from the alien power cell. He felt tired in a way he had never known. He would build again, he knew. But not today. In the deep bunker, Kim Tae-shik still sat at his computers. The Exani network was gone. a silent hole in the digital world. He had saved everything, all the data he had stolen, all the logs of the attack. He did not understand what had finally made them leave. He had uploaded the history files, but he had no way of knowing if they had even been seen. The not knowing itched at him. Sergeant Park Yuna did not rest. She organized patrols, not to fight, but to secure. She sent scouts far out to confirm the Exani were truly gone. She set up communication lines between the scattered pockets of survivors. Her face never lost its hard, focused look. The war was over, but her mind was still at war. She waited for the other shoe to drop. Months passed. The seasons turned. Grass began to grow through the cracks in the glass-smooth circle where the stock exchange had been. People lived in the shadows of broken buildings, but they lived. They planted small gardens in the rubble. They collected rainwater. One day, a signal was detected. It was not Exani. It was a tight being repeating broadcast on a frequency used by old human deep space probes. It was coming from the edge of the solar system. Taishik was called to decipher it. He worked for a day and a night. When he was done, he called Yuna, Jihu, and the others to the bunker. His face was pale. He played the message. It was not a voice. It was data, translated into text on the screen. It was a public service announcement meant for wide distribution across something called the Galactic Datasphere. It contained a simple star map, a warning symbol, and a block of text. The text was repeated in hundreds of different language formats. Yuna read it aloud. Her voice flat in the quiet room. Caution. Vermilion level hazard. Terran system. Planet 3. Species designation. Human. Threat profile. Exhibits reactive extinction level resilience. Societal paradigm. Total war. Do not initiate hostilities. Do not attempt harvest. Do not establish contact. Predicted outcome of conflict. Guaranteed mutual annihilation or critical degradation of invading force. Quarantine advised. They do not submit. They escalate. They wilter. Your empire to dust. No one spoke. The hum of the computer fan was the only sound. Jihu finally broke the silence. What is it? It's a sign, Taishik said softly. A sign they put on our door, for everyone else out there to see. Yuna stared at the words. They will turn your empire to dust. They were the words she had spoken to the prisoner in a cold room underground. Her idea, her history, had been weaponized. Not by a bomb, but by a warning. Humanity had not won a battle. They had earned a reputation. Is it a good thing? Minho asked, frowning. It is not a victory, Yuna said, her eyes still on the screen. It is a threat. A threat about us, made by someone else. It means they are not coming back. But it also means no one else might ever come. The truth of that settled over them. They were alone, not just on their broken world, but in the galaxy. They were the monsters in the dark, the story told to scare children on other worlds. They were quarantined. Years later, the rebuilding had taken shape. New buildings, made from the old rubble, stood shorter and stronger. Fields where cities once were now grew food. The memory of the war was a deep scar, but it was no longer an open wound. On a clear night, Li Jihu, now a counselor for the new settlement, walked with Park Yuna along a rebuilt observation deck. The stars were sharp and bright, unpolluted by the lights of the old world. They stopped and looked up. Do you think they're out there? Jihu asked. Looking back at us? Seeing that warning? Yes, Yuna said. She had finally allowed herself to relax. The hard line between her eyebrows was softer now. I think they are. And I think they are very, very careful. We never wanted to be feared, Jihu said. We just wanted to be left alone. Yuna nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. We got our wish. In the end, that is all we ever wanted, to be left alone. And now, because of what we did to get it, we will be. For a long, long time. They stood in silence for a while, two small figures under the vast, silent sky. The galaxy was full of life and light and empire. But around one small blue-green world, there was a circle of quiet, a space that wiser species now avoided, a neighborhood that had become bad because of the people who lived there. The warning beacon at the edge of the solar system continued to pulse its message into the dark. It was not a call for help. It was not a declaration of war. It was a story, a lesson learned at great cost by the Ixani Star Imperium, now passed on to all who could hear. Do not attack the humans. It was the most valuable piece of diplomatic communication humanity would ever have. They did not write it. They earned it. And as the years turned into centuries, the truth of it would settle over the recovering world like a blanket, a strange and heavy peace, born not from friendship, but from a promise of retaliation so terrible it had become a wall between them and the stars. They were alone, and they were safe. For now, and perhaps forever, that was enough.